Mr. Garg, thank you so much, Rajan, for joining today and joining with us at TechSparks. We are very honored to have you. And the topic we want to address today is building an AatmaNirbhar Bharat. Prime Minister's clarion call that we have to, look at in a very focused way to build an AatmaNirbhar Bharat. And we're seeing so many steps being taken in that direction. But what will it actually take to become fully self-reliant when it comes to a country, and how can startups, how can innovators enable that? With this, I'll straight get into my first question that, we all know that Indian economy has shrunk and the pandemic has really played a big part in it. And I'm told that the contraction is by 10.3 points in the current fiscal, but we are going to bounce back. And there's also this that we will grow to 8.8% in next fiscal, surpassing even China's 8.2% growth. So India will bounce back. But if you had to tell, and both of you, if you had to say what are some of the things that will get us to this growth number, and more so, which are the sectors, spaces that you see playing a key role in India's, in India's robust march to becoming Atmanirbhar?
So it's the government's responsibility first, then the private sectors. And that's how the economy grows. So let me start with that. Thank you, Shradha, for a very great initiative of this TechSparks. And in this time of very difficult times, the magnitude at which you are conducting this event, I should congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
And this is one way in which we can make AatmaNirbhar Bharat when the women folks actually lead the show, and you are doing it.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
So this is one way that, so when we are talking about the AatmaNirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant Bharat, it is very different from the one we talked about in the pre-90s, a non-liberalized world. And this is in an era where we have an interconnected world. So we are not actually isolating ourselves from the world, but reimagining ourselves in the new normal. The new normal because of the COVID and because of the challenge that the trusted value chain have created, and the global supply chains have been disrupted in the present scenario. So what you need to do is two things. You have to reimagine yourself, and you have to reimagine your partners globally. You cannot have the same yardsticks for all, but you have to have trusted partners, create partnerships which are synergetic, which actually benefit both the partners, and create a global ecosystem which is creating values for this and having respect for both the worlds. So in this respect, I'll talk about two things. One, the trust is not between geographies. The trust is also between human to human. And when you are talking about a human-to-human, lack of human-to-human trust that this pandemic has created today, so you need a medium to actually create that interface between two humans, and no other than the digital can be that interplay between the two. In this respect, Shradha, you should note that the pandemic happened at a time when the industry 4.0 was at the verge of its getting matured. The AIs, the IoTs, the machine-to-machine learning, the remote manufacturing, and all this is happening at a time when, so the combination of two creates two things, that the technology plays the key enabler for the next phase of growth. So the same set of companies will not actually make this revival happen, but will actually a new set of innovative ecosystem that will create this next wave of growth. That will bring the India back. The AatmaNirbhar Bharat means where you actually create an innovation value add on global products, on global technologies and global solutions, and create solutions that will actually impact the whole population globally. Understand, what did digital do in the last 15 to 20 years? It impacted the first 1.5 billion people of the world. And that's what Silicon Valley gave. The next wave is where the problems of all sectors of economy will be solved by digital and will impact the whole 7.5 billion people of the world. And if you are solving problems, there can be no better world than India, because we know what the problems are, and our startups are frugal, low cost, and directly impacting the use cases. And that is where, if we actually support them, by which the support that has to come from the government, the industry, the large corporates, and a right flow of capital into this ecosystem, will create what you require for the next phase of growth of India. And that's some of my initial points on this subject.
No, absolutely. And Shradha, thank you for having us. And it's great to be on this panel with Dr. Garg and yourself. So, 2 weeks ago, Thai Delhi NCR, together with Zeno, published a research report that was very extensive, right? That looked at what has happened to the startup ecosystem over the last 6 months. And the net of it was, number one, the impact was very severe. India has 39,000 startups as we went into COVID, as 2020 started. About 15% of those startups have unfortunately discontinued operations. For the first 2 months, fundraising, everything was pretty much at a standstill, right? So if you look at number of companies funded fundraising April, May, June quarter compared to Jan, Feb, March quarter, it was down 50% or 55%, etc. So I think the first couple of months were very, very challenging for everyone, whether they were startups, investors, etc. But I think as we sort of highlighted in the report, Shradha, the recovery of especially digitally led startups in India has been much, much faster than anybody could have expected, right? So even if you had asked us, let's say first week of April, right, 2 or 3 weeks into the India's lockdown, how long this could take. I mean, I was at that point talking about the fact that this is going to take a very long time, right? But what's happened here is at the end of September, when you look at it, most sectors that are digitally led have not just recovered, but are well ahead of pre-COVID levels, and pre-COVID being sort of, let's call it February of 2020, right? So if you look at February of 2020 as pre-COVID, and you look at end of September and sort of see where are different digitally led segments, most segments are well ahead. So not surprisingly, segments like teleconsultation, online fitness are 500, five times the size of where they were in February. You look at EdTech, it's double the size of where it was, in February, right? And then you look at a bunch of other sectors. You look at online grocery, it's 50% bigger than where it was. You look at electronics, e-commerce, it's 30% bigger than it was, and so on and so forth, right? Actually, interestingly, online health insurance is 2x of where it was. Not surprising. So with the only exception, there are some exceptions to that. The exceptions are really the segments or the sectors that are most impacted, right? Like let's look at international airline bookings. They're at 5%. Hospitality, online hotel bookings, they're at 30%. Domestic flights are at 40%, and even food delivery, which in many countries actually had grown significantly. In India, was impacted because we couldn't deliver food, and then we had a few set of issues to overcome. Is at about 85%. So with the exception of a few very, very deeply impacted sectors, I think everything else has sort of recovered. That's if you're digital led. Now, I think in the startup ecosystem, as you know, Shradha, we have a lot of startups that are not digital startups. I think those startups continue to actually be very challenged because they don't have a digital component, right? And I think this is where where I think the real power of digital and digital India and what it can do for India's economy has really, really come to light, right? Because the reality is consumers are spending more time online. Businesses have to digitalize themselves. And who better to actually build those products than Indian entrepreneurs, right? So I think what it's really shown is, as we think about India, not just sort of coming out of this next year and growing at 8 or 9%, but really how do we grow at 8% for the next 20 years, right? That's what India needs to do. India doesn't need to grow at 8% for 1 year. We need to grow at 8% for the next 20 years. The role that startups can play is really very, very fundamental to India's sort of economic story, right? So I think that's the first big point. I think the other one, when it comes to AatmaNirbhar Bharat, right? My view is, look, it's about, what does it mean? It means world class. Let's build world-class companies that can actually win anywhere in the world. And if they're going to win anywhere in the world, they're going to win in India, right? And I'll pick sort of two examples, right? The two most important technology companies in India and from India today are TCS which is the most valuable IT services company in the world now. A couple of weeks ago, they passed Accenture as, $140 billion market cap. And the other one is Jio, Reliance, but really Jio, right? Which actually revolutionized. And what's interesting here is these two companies are examples of what Indian startups can do, the next 20 years, right? One, win the world. That's TCS. India to the world, global from day zero. SaaS is sort of a wave we've already seen. We had 0 SaaS unicorns, 2 years ago. Now we have 5 SaaS unicorns. And the second is really win the domestic market. Right? Win the domestic market is really Jio. I mean, by the way, there were lots of international telcos that came and went, Shradha, over the years. Many of them that came and went, right? But today, I think there's no question as to who the undisputed winner of the Indian telco market is. Number one and number two are basically Indian companies, like Jio and Airtel. And that's really about winning the domestic market. And I think when we think about the domestic market, I think what we are seeing Indian companies do, to the point that Dr. Garg made, is they're innovating for India. Right? If you look at a company like a Byju's or an Unacademy, right? This is sort of meeting a significant pain point that Indian consumers have, right? If you look at a company like Katabook, Katabook, which is digitizing sort of, very, very small merchants, kirana stores, etc. By the way, there's not been a company like Katabook built anywhere else in the world. Right? It's the fastest 0 to 1 million SME acquisition of any software company in history of business. Fastest 0 to 5 million, fastest 0 to 8 million. It'll probably be the fastest 0 to 20 million SMEs, right? So as we think about startups, I think the most important thing is we have to build world-class startups that can win anywhere, right? Because TCS would not be a $140 billion market cap company and the most successful IT services company in the world if all they did was serve India's needs. Right? You just can't get there, right? Because the simple way I think about it, Shradha, is India is $2.5 trillion GDP. The world is $80 trillion. So if you want to win something, win the 80 trillion, right? So that's I think so. As we think about this particular topic, I think the thing we need to always keep coming back to is: are we building the absolute best companies in the world?
What are some of the things that we can do to become an export hub, and how do you see startups playing a role? And Rajan, here I wanted to say, today I had a very interesting, again, conversation on rare earths elements, right? Like how China is today leading in the rare earths elements. And we in India had started doing this in 1950. In fact, our first policy was in 1950, but somewhere it didn't move. And Prime Minister in 2014 has signed with Japan this pact to build this, because this is going to be powering the digital economy. So just want to get a sense, how do we do that? And Mr. Garg, you tell us, because you are sitting where a lot of these policies, the things that you will implement will enable startups to look at this direction and become an export hub. So just want to get a sense from both of you, what are some of the things that we can do?
So let me start off with, let's take an example of the mobile manufacturing ecosystem that has evolved from being non-existent in 2014, right now having around 250 companies, 1.25 lakh crores of manufacturing. So what we did during the pandemic, when we saw that the global supply chain is being disrupted, so what we did is we came up with a performance linked incentive scheme with the basic purpose that the next generation electronics or the mobile manufacturing will be not only for Make in India for India, but Make in India for globally. The performance link is a value add system in which the more the value add you do, more the incentives you get from the government. And that's the perception, that's the change that is required. And that's where you are coming into sub-assemblies to components to ultimately a fab in India. And that will, if that happens, that creates the robust basic infrastructure for all type of companies to actually build upon it, and startups will be one of the key enablers to bring in the value add into the manufacturing ecosystem. And that is one example I want. The other example I want to give is the way we think differently from the world in terms of digitalization. The world believes in the concept of proprietary digital platform. and innovation happening over them. Few players win, most of them lose. There are Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons to be $1 trillion industry, but the SME sector in US is missing. In India, the public digital platforms, whether it's Aadhaar, the UPI, or the coming health stack, or the agri-tech and the edutech that the government is moving toward, is a base platform by the government, publicly available, data available for innovation, and the system of and the business and private players and the public players having an equal role, bringing innovation into the system. And that's a model which is very different from the world where we talk about public digital. There is no other example in the world. There is no Aadhaar, no UPI anywhere. UPI is a success that will actually create the whole fintech ecosystem, not only for India, but rest of the developing world. And not only for if US looks up towards India for an UPI, or Japan having showing interest in the UPI, and these are game changers. So what we need to look at is that how do we create policy ecosystems, infrastructure ecosystems that enables innovation to happen, and government playing an enabler role, the equity flow coming into the market, and that understand what I was talking prior to this starting, that the missing link in our startup ecosystem is the rupee capital. That does not allow Indian companies with scale up to remain in India. If we create a system in which the rupee capital actually starts flowing into the system, that is changing. A few of the venture funds which I have seen in the last few months, and I won't name them, are all actually coming towards helping seed stage and early stage companies with rupee capital that will make Indian companies stay in India. Government has also is cognizant of the fact that more and more funds should flow into the system. We are making an attempt under the Software Product Development Fund to bring in some of the untapped investors into the system so that more and more rupee capital flows into the system. Another important thing is that because of not a very strong, robust system around lendings, which was there around 6 years, we have importantly missed a very important source of capital, that is crowdfunding. We need to create that confidence, that bring in that individual investors into the market, small investors, they playing a key role, and they create pressure points for companies to grow and deliver that whatever profits they have back to these small investors. That's some of my points.
Sir, thank you so much. Your rupee capital point will resonate with everyone watching, every entrepreneur watching, because we need rupee capital. And if you in the government is saying this is very encouraging and very important. Rajan, what do you think? What are some of the things that you see are needed to make this happen?
Yeah, so I think, to your specific question, Shradha, of exports, right? And so, the first major wave of sort of tech-driven exports was IT services. We saw what that wave sort of created, right? Several $100 billion sort of dollar inflows into the country, directly employs 3 million people and so on. But I think now when we look at the next, and that industry will continue to grow, right? Because, those companies are playing in a $1 trillion global market. But I think now when we look at sort of startups, in many ways, the first big wave of, India to the world, let's just call them India to the world startups, right, are being built in SaaS. So the first SaaS unicorn from India, I mean, let's set aside Zoho, because Zoho's been a unicorn for a long time, but it's a private company. So Sridhar won't say exactly what the company is worth, but dollars. But let's set that aside. But, in the current generation or the new crop of startups, Freshworks was the first SaaS unicorn, right? Druva was the second. Then we had iCertis and so on. Postman was the fifth, right? So we've had 5 SaaS unicorns, and these are India to the world sort of companies. And our view is this decade, 2020 to 2030 is the decade for Indian SaaS. And there's no reason why we won't have 20-25 SaaS unicorns by 25, right? So in the next 5 years, we'll see at least another 20 SaaS unicorns. So think of it as 4 or 5 SaaS unicorns a year that will emerge from India. That is one big wave, and that's a great way to sort of service all the needs around the world, right? I think the second very interesting wave is really direct to consumer brands, right? So Amazon, Shradha, I'm sure Amit mentioned this, who leads Amazon, is, if you go back a few years ago, right, Amazon had zero exports from India. But
Yeah.
today, Amazon is now at $2 billion of exports. And what was very interesting when I talked to the Amazon team is $1 billion of that, 7,500 crores, is new brands. New brands from India that are selling on Amazon US and Amazon UK and wherever else, largely the US, right? And they've set an
Yeah.
target that they've been very public with to get to 10 billion. So when I look at that, I say, look, here's one platform, Amazon. There are many others, right, around the world. That where we can actually build many large number of 1,000 crore brands from India, serving the world, right? So in fact, in our portfolio, we have several of these companies. One of them is called Skillmatics. They're a Bombay-based startup. Shradha, right? I mean, this company was launched about 2 or 3 years ago. They basically make these educational toys that they sell around the world. But they've grown 10x over the last year, and the next year they're going to grow another 10x from here, right? This is going to be a gigantic company. Basically, by leveraging Indian design, Indian manufacturing, entire supply chain is in India, right? There's 100%. But actually selling on Amazon US, they are the number one rated educational toy in Amazon US, right? So that's a second category, and we really do believe there's going to be a large number of companies that are going to get built on that thesis, if you will, right? I think the third one that's very interesting is services from India to the world, but non-IT. What a lot of people don't talk about, Shradha, I think you've had him on your story, is Whitehead Jr. was the fastest $0 to $100 million revenue startup. And I mean real revenue, right? I don't mean GMV and, like real revenue, right? And this company got to 100 million by being a global from day zero company, right? So look at Whitehead Jr. or what now Byju's is doing with, in the US, etc. India could become the global hub for education, right? Where we can actually be educators, not just of our 350 million students we have in India, right? During lockdown, Shradha, there were 1.6 billion students around the world that were studying from home because they had no, schools were shut down, right? If you look at Africa, Africa has a 90 million teacher shortage, right? So can we just, and you can pick education, then you can pick healthcare, right? We know, right? There's a massive shortage of doctors, of nurses, so on and so forth. So I think the third category is what I say non-IT services exports at scale, right? And the power of this is it creates jobs, right? So Whitehead Jr., that was a company that's less than 2 years old, actually employs 5,000 women who teach coding to both Indian students, but also students in the US. Right. So India today has about 1 million teachers, right? I actually think if we can be very thoughtful about this, Shradha, there's no reason why India can't have another 1 million teachers. And the next 1 million teachers will actually teach the world, right? And it'll be math, it'll be science, it'll be computer coding, it'll be English. I mean, pick your favorite topics, right? So I think there are many. So in many ways, the SaaS wave that started, let's say a decade ago, right now, which is now hitting its stride, is the first of many different segments of Indian startups that will emerge, that will actually be global from day zero, right? And what's exciting is even when we look at our portfolio, we see so many interesting companies that are actually global from day zero. Actually, we have a company, it's not announced yet. You'll hear about it soon, Shradha, which actually launched in the US consumer market, straight up. India to the US, their first V1 of the product was launched actually in the US, right? So that really is the exports. And in terms of what the government can do on the exports front, I think is just make it easy to do business. Make it easy to start up, make it easy to scale, take away tax issues, right? I mean, as you all all companies in India have lots of tax issues. Take those things away, right? Make it so easy to start up, so easy to scale up. Right, and then have the right bilateral deals, right? So I'm also a subscriber to the fact that if somebody doesn't let you do business in their country, then maybe they should do business here. But if somebody lets you do business in their country, we should figure out how to actually have very, very strong bilateral ties. So I think if we can make it easy to do, and then I have a few other thoughts on things like capital and talent that we'll get to.
To build these kind of companies, it requires capital, it takes time, it takes effort. So what can we do in that direction? And what are some of the thoughts? Because we've been discussing this, is enough happening? And if not, then what should we do?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then look. So clearly we have a gap in R&D. There's no question, right? If you look at percentage of GDP that goes into I mean, we are not in the, we are not in any map whatsoever, right? And we do need to invest a lot more in R&D, right? It has to start with government R&D spending in defense. It has to start with R&D in our top universities. It has to start with corporate R&D. I mean, our corporate R&D is minuscule, virtually non-existent in R&D, right? So I do agree, Shradha, that is an important factor. But I actually think India's competitive advantage is applying existing technologies to very large scale problems. Okay, why do we have the world's most advanced payments ecosystem in India? It's not because we figured out a new way to do payments. It's because of the public digital infrastructure that Dr. Garg referred to that we built out, right? The India stack, starting with Aadhaar, UPI, and now actually getting into account aggregator and Open and things like that. So I think as a nation, what India is extraordinary at, and I can't even tell you, right? It is our absolute competitive advantage, is taking the best technologies and applying to what Nandan Nilenkani calls population scale problems. And when you have a population of 1.3 billion, you're solving for a billion, right? The tech you build is massively scalable. So that's why UPI, right, is the most advanced payments. I mean, there's no question, right? I mean, like the Americans want to, Sundar Pichai, right? Where I was at Google, wrote to the US government saying, you should adopt this, which is amazing, right? So I think that is super, super important. So I agree with you that we should invest in R&D, but keep in mind, right? India is still, GDP per capita of less than $2,000. We're a $2.5 trillion economy, right? As our GDP per capita goes, as our tax revenues go, right, we are going to be able to invest. At the end of the day, it is investments, right? But in the meantime, there's no reason why India can't have some of the most advanced AI companies in the world. We won't do the next generation computer vision, but our entrepreneurs will apply computer vision to our problems that are now, at a scale that nobody has seen before, right? So I think that is sort of, what a lot of people forget is, TCS is worth $140 billion market cap. They didn't invent the operating system. They don't make proprietary software. They didn't make hardware. They don't make chipsets. What they did was they took the best of breed technologies with amazing talent, and they solved the biggest technology problems of the biggest companies in the world, right? So, and I think, right, and look at Jio, right? Now, Jio obviously now is, I think, getting into some 5G sort of developmental work. I mean, Jio transformed the telecom industry in India, not by going out and inventing new cell towers, right? By taking existing technology, but, uniquely applying it to these population scale problems that we have in India. So I actually get a lot more excited about applying Indian entrepreneurship, applying Indian ingenuity to, these massive problems that we have, right? Dr. Garg referred to them as well. You look at agriculture. I actually think, by the way, India will have the most innovative agricultural companies in the world in a decade. There's no question. Why? Because, all the, we can take computer, we can take computer vision, NLP, speech to text, we can take satellites, we can take all this technology and apply it on 50 million smallholder farmers. No other country in the world can do that.
The R&D, but what we need to do is look at three things. Most of the R&D in India is public funded. Many of it flows into our premier educational institutes or public institutes of research. The translation has been a challenge where R&D has not actually connected to commercial gains or economic gains. And that has been a very large missing link. And unless and until you get excited by the fact that some of the research flows into economic benefits, the money flow actually does not take, the ecosystem does not create. We, as the Ministry of Electronics, you must be aware of what we call as a Technology Incubation and Development of Entrepreneurs Scheme, which we started in 2009. Now we have scaled it up to a much larger scale in 2019. What we did is we actually promoted institutional research to be converted into commercial benefits by creating entrepreneurs out of that research inside the institutes of higher learning or research. The amazing fact is government spent 34 crores on that, created 450 entrepreneurs out of our educational institute. The flow of investment into these companies by the private sector was 452 crores by 34 crores being translated, and that was the success of the Tide 1.0. We need many more of these. The second important thing when you talk about IP is yes, the time it takes to get a patent in India or anywhere else. But the main factor is that the Indian company, which is working for Globe, there's a cost involved in patenting. That is huge, and most of our startups are not able to afford it. We came up for the E and IT sector, what we call it is support for international patents, where we provide a reimbursement of 15 lakh rupees or the 50% of the total international patent filing cost. But we need it much more of this. We need people to understand the value of IP. The third important factor that's very, very important when you're talking about R&D is that old stereotype methods where research leading to research papers, leading to patents and IP was only the way you talked about. Our 39,000 startups, of them 20,000 are doing R&D. They're doing applied research leading to innovation, leading to economic benefit. We have to look at R&D in a different way, where the use cases, solving problems, is a way by which IP has been created. And these are the three things I think if we look at, we are looking at R&D in a very, very different perspective than what it used to be from the Second World War.
Thank you so much, sir. This would be very encouraging to all the entrepreneurs who are watching this right now.